So 2 weeks ago, Nigeria observed the anniversary 8 years ago when the world woke up to the harrowing story of the kidnapping of 276 girls in Chibok, northeastern Borno state. Boko Haram kidnapped the girls from a school in the northeastern town of Chibok in April 2014. The kidnappings sparked outrage and gave rise to a global #BringBackOurGirls campaign. About half of the girls have since been found or freed, but many never returned home. Some escaped, but it took the Nigerian government 3 years to negotiate the release of fewer than half of them. Although the Nigerian government has repeatedly claimed it is doing its best to free them, their traumatized parents feel otherwise. And we'll look back now at a conversation that's taken place in Nigeria and transatlantically at the plight of 109 of those girls who are in captivity. For more, we're joined now by Professor Mojubaolu Olufunku Okome, who is a professor of political science at Brooklyn College, City University of New York in the United States of America. So thank you firstly for joining us. It must have been a very emotive conversation that you were having. I understand was you and various campaigners, activists, including survivors of the Chibok Girls. Let's just first start with the tone of that conversation. 8 years on, it must be very dispiriting.
It was very emotional, and some of the people who attended were in tears. Some of the survivors are I guess, weighed down that they were not funding tears, but you could see the stress and the strain and the trauma in their bodies and their expressions. And one of the mothers actually said that a lot of the mothers and parents in the community have things like high blood pressure and emotional pain that sometimes shows up as depression. And it's not been easy because in the community, some of the children were returned, some of the young women, I should say, because they're now in their 20s. And some parents have had to cope with not having their own daughters back. And some parents have had to cope with their daughters having died, or at least they heard that their daughters died. So we didn't only have parents from Chibok, survivors from Chibok, we also had from DAP 10 girls were abducted from their school. I think about 105 of them were 104 were returned. About 5 of them died, and 1 is still being held. And she has had 2 babies while in captivity. Some of the survivors who came with their stories also are 2 women who had lived in Boko Haram captivity for 7 and 8 years, and both of them have 2 babies. And one of the I think hopeful things is that we heard from survivors, one of whom is in American University, Yola. She is now in the university, and she expresses the desire to really get her education so that she can give back to her community. Another young woman talked about also being in university, another university in northern Nigeria, where she's studying law, because she wants to use the knowledge that she garners to help her community. And there was a young man in the Chibok community who got sponsored by Murtala Mohammed Foundation, and he has graduated from University of Lagos. So he did some social work as part of his studies, and he wanted Dr. Akilu, the psychologist who specializes in trauma, to give him training so that he can further help his community.
Prof, just
and
before you go
he's actually
further,
working as a...
Allow me to jump in and go back to the subject of your discussion today, because I think it's important that we establish that foundation. It was titled Narratives of Trauma, Survival, and Perseverance. And I want us to zero in because, as you mentioned, the people who joined you today were from other communities as well. But people often just think about the kidnapped girls. But I've read stories of girls who said the insurgents actually came knocking, went door to door and sometimes looking for young girls. One said that they insisted that they wanted to marry her. She refused. They went away, but eventually came back, kidnapped her. She was forced to marry one of the Boko Haram militants, and as you said, was forced to have children. But some of them were boys who were kidnapped and forced to be child soldiers.
Yes.
So the narrative is so much wider than we know, that we're limited to.
Indeed. We had, let's be clear, Boko Haram has killed more people than ISIS. Boko Haram has used more people as suicide bombers than anywhere else in the world. Boko Haram has used more girls as suicide bombers than anywhere else in the world. The people who have been abducted include women, young girls, and boys as well as men. The men are conscripted into Boko Haram's army, and they are they're compelled to stay with them regardless of, their own individual desires. Any disobedience is met with brutal force. The young girls, some of them as young as 8, are used sometimes as suicide bombers. Now, this idea also that Boko Haram is marrying girls is totally illegitimate. What they're doing is forcing sex and sexual servitude on these girls, because the girls are not interested. They're not old enough. They want to have a normal life, have their education, and these people are swooping down, abducting them, keeping them in captivity, and then claiming to be married to them. So they are raping them, frankly. Some of the girls have had babies. And like I said, 2 of the survivors who came to give their testimony at our event have 2 babies each. It's not been easy for them. In the 2 communities, there are parents whose children were told, they were told their children died in captivity. And, some of the heart-rending stories about this, the parents saying, we don't know if they were buried properly or if they were just thrown in the bush. And so the girls also were saying that the horrors they endured are so severe that they do not like to think about it. They want to move forward with their lives, but it's impossible to move forward because those memories are still weighing down on them. And then with the community, the whole community is traumatized because the violence that is used to keep communities in check is extreme. People also are afraid to send their daughters to school because they don't want the daughters to be abducted. They have not been able to do their work because they're predominantly farmers. People also are abducted on their farms, and their crops are stolen, and they are also brutalized in so many ways. So these are communities, and over 3 million people in the conflict areas in northern Nigeria are displaced. Some of them, one of the women who gave testimony lives in an IDP camp. And she talked about the fact that there's insufficient everything: food, water, medical care, schooling for the children. So these are communities. The trauma is the fear for physical safety, the actual experience of abduction and captivity.
So,
Also,
Prof,
the stress. Yes.
I want us to, I'm sorry, because we are running out of time. We've only got 6 minutes left, and I want us to get into some of the solutions. As you were talking about the trauma of the survivors and the terrorized community, some of the survivors say that the community distrusts them, thinking that they still operate under the influence of Boko Haram, that they're a danger to the community. So they're being doubly traumatized. And I'm thinking your colleague, the co-founder of Bring Back Our Girls, has said that perhaps this ought to be an election issue. And I'm wondering, do you agree with this? Is there consensus amongst Nigerians? Because it's about a bigger and wider problem. We've spoken about the growing banditry in Nigeria. Although the parliament is drawing up legislation to toughen up the Terrorism Act, but the bottom line is, what do you do with IDPs? How do you protect those who have already suffered and are trying to be rehabilitated back into these communities?
One of the groups that is insisting that security is imperative and should be an election issue is a coalition of Nigerian women-led NGOs and women who, over 500, who have said that, we need to have peace and security prioritized.
All right, I'm going to see if we can reconnect with Professor Okome, Professor Mojubaolu Olufunku Okome. Now, part of the suggestions that are being made by those who are saying this should possibly be an election issue is that there's a need to distinguish between Boko Haram ideologues from those who joined for other motives and ensure transparency and fair investigation of both the male and female perpetrators of Boko Haram. Professor Mojubaolu Olufunku is back with us. So you just froze a bit when you were explaining those who are making this call and why.
Yes, there's a group called Womanifesto, and I'm a member too, and many of the people who are founders and members of Bring Back Our Girls in Nigeria are members. They're calling for security to be one of the top issues in Nigeria. They're also, all the people in the embattled communities also want peace and security. And as we know, this has spread beyond northern Nigeria to the east, to the west, to the middle belt. So security is a top issue for many Nigerians. But, Nigeria still has issues with nation building and acting in concert. So there are divisions among Nigerians. And these divisions are based on ethnicity, some based on religion, and so forth. I think because of this, it's diluting the universality of the demand, because ethnic concerns, religious concerns creep in and then divide people. But you can't speak to people in any part of Nigeria today and they don't tell you that security is a top issue. There's also poverty, human security, that in these areas in northern Nigeria, they're very poor already. The violence has prevented them from doing their work, and it has intensified impoverishment. Going to school has become a major concern because people are afraid that their children might be abducted. Medical care is an issue. So security, both personal and human security, are huge concerns. And the way to, the solution to this is for there to be multiple strategies to address this issue. Why are people becoming insurgent? Why are people becoming bandits? I think poverty is part of it, although the misinterpretation of religion can also lead to people's radicalization in this way.
Can I ask this question,
strategies
Prof?
That, yeah.
And just very briefly, because we have run out of time, could a better understanding of patriarchy, women, and Islam in the Northeast be also part of that?
All over Nigeria and I dare say all over the world, there is a need for dismantling of patriarchy, because women should not be seen as, as pawns in these games that men play. Women should have their human rights respected, right to security, right to reach, their aspirations in terms of their human potential. And there, the tragic thing is that there are UN resolutions that Nigeria has signed on to on women, peace, and security. Also, if there's conflict in a zone, including women in peace building and in making decisions on how to use resources that are supposed to meet the humanitarian needs of the people is important. In all these respects, there's failure, So there is a need to see women as fully human, as entitled to all the rights and privileges that men have as citizens. And a cease and desist situation of do not use women, don't use rape as an instrument of war. War in itself is actually to be discouraged. And some of the things that would discourage it, some of the tools are economic, making sure that people have their basic needs met, making sure that they feel that they are respected in their persons, that they have all the rights that that the 1% have, that their children have a right to have a better tomorrow. Those things are necessary. They are a necessary part of what needs to be done. And then when people are traumatized, you have to make them whole, by giving them long-term psychosocial assistance and including them in making the solutions to their problems.
Prof, unfortunately, that's where we will leave it, but I'm sure we can look forward to more conversations around some of these issues in the near future. Much obliged to you for your time and your insights. Mojubaolu Olufunku Okome is a professor of political science at Brooklyn College City University of New York in the United States of America. Earlier on, she and a number of NGOs, activists who are calling for greater efforts to bring back home the more than 100 Chibok girls who were kidnapped home, including survivors, were part of a discussion about narratives of trauma and, survival, perseverance in remembering the 8th year anniversary of that kidnapping in 2014. Well, let's continue now with other news after the break. You're watching The Globe.